I'm sure it'll happen at some point.
All right. So I just started recording on my side. Let me close this down. All right. So do you have a hard out? What's your schedule look like?
No, pretty chilled, pretty chilled. The only slight thing might be if there's a major baby problem, I might get a Mike and have to run downstairs.
Okay.
But she's pretty much in control.
We can we can pause if that happens. I've got a mattress being delivered, so
Okay,
that's what's happening on my end. You got the baby, I
sure.
got the mattress.
Yeah.
I think that kind of
Okay,
sums
so we
it
might
up.
have to run. Sure. Well, you
All
see, that
right.
makes me very jealous because that clearly means you're getting better sleep than me, or you will be getting better sleep than me now
I
as well.
hope to be soon. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, we bought a house, and so we're sort of
Uh,
in that stage of, okay, we got to buy a bathtub, we got to buy a sink, we got to buy a stove, we got to buy a bed. It's like, okay,
yeah.
yeah, big
Yeah.
drain.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, here we are, Mike. We're at it. We're trying again, taking another swing at this. A lot's happened since we got together to record this podcast, and we had some technological fuck up and ended up not being able to use it. What was that, 6 months ago, a year ago?
I think a year ago. I think a year ago.
A
Yeah.
year ago. And so
Yeah.
since then, you've quit your job, you've had a baby, you've moved apartments. Anything else? Have you beaten cancer? Have you
No.
mastered manned flight or anything? It's been a big
Yeah,
year.
I've done all the stressful things that you shouldn't do in one year, right? So yeah, so we bought a house and we
We
went through
bought
that
a house.
nesting phase and never planned really on having a baby. Or we kind of spoke about it, but it was more, oh, we'll do that in a couple of years. And then we got pregnant, which was ace. And then yeah, and then I found out I was getting made redundant in the job, which was a blessing because I've been meaning to quit that job for a number of years to start
Mm.
the business full time. So it's either the best time to run a business or the worst time. It's probably a bit of both, but yeah, it's things have changed a lot since we last spoke. But I must say, it's really wonderful. Yeah,
Well, you look calm. I don't know. Do you have like a make me look calm filter on Zoom or
I should
something?
have that, shouldn't I? It might be all the breath work. I don't know, but yeah, I feel pretty good. I feel
Do
pretty
you?
calm, and also I'm talking to you, man. So it's always
Oh,
you
that's
always
very
chill me
calming.
out. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't believe that, but I'll pretend I do. Uh, well, anyway, it's really good to connect with you again.
Yeah, same.
Um, we and I should say, I don't know if this is something I should say publicly, but why not? We're talking. Um,
Mm,
you were so generous and so cool. You contacted me to set up my a YouTube channel,
mm.
and you did all this work on the YouTube channel, and then um I got this deal with Substack, and part of the deal was I can't do anything on any other platform and I can't advertise. And so I'm sorry about that. And you were really graceful, and that was I felt bad about that because you had invested time in a project we were going to do together, and then suddenly I couldn't do it for a while. So thanks for being chill about that.
It was a blessing in a number of ways. Number one, um, it got me connected to you, which was ace, and we had a couple of conversations, and you came on my podcast. It also made me realize I don't want to be a video editor, so it was a really good thing that happened. So ironically, now for like my podcast, I've edited that out. I've outsourced that now, which I never wanted to do because my background was like video editing and all that sort of jazz. And so it was like, oh, I also felt this thing around, oh, I'm letting Chris down. I should be pumping out more content for him. And so
Mhm.
the universe spoke, I think, and I think it worked out really well for us both. So yeah, but it made me think because I was thinking, oh, I could do yours. Maybe I could get in touch with Duncan and different people and do all their podcasts. And then I was like, I'm
Right.
not really enjoying this. I'd rather be like making the content. So it worked
Right.
out quite well.
Right.
Yeah,
So I mean, I'd like to talk about breath work and, come to that, and really pick your brain about that. But I'd like to, if you're willing, go back because I remember in our previous conversation, you had some major life transformation. What, 5 years ago, something like that, the
about
Camino and all
35, yeah,
that.
7 years ago. Yeah, so 2017 was the Camino. I went through my divorce about a year and a half before that. So that kind of mid 30s, which I've heard from a few people now, seems to be quite a transformative period in
Yeah.
people's lives, that mid to late 30s. And yeah, so everything kind of, that old life kind of just died, the early 30s life. And there was a huge transformation that happened. It all started with getting married and not really wanting to get married, but that being
Mm.
the next phase. And hearing you on Joe Rogan years ago when I was working away, and you guys have all inspired so many people, and just hearing that, oh, there's another way to do stuff, and not really ever acknowledging that there was a problem in the marriage, not really being that open about it in my head. You kind of just brush it to one side and think things will get better.
What
And then
was the
she
problem?
ended the marriage.
Was it just incompatibility, or was there some?
It was incompatibility. It was so with Nina now, who we've just had our little boy with. It's completely different. It's effortless. It's just
Mm.
the love is there. The attraction, everything. It's just effortless. And I think I was really young when I got with my ex-wife. I was sort of 21, 22. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do with my life. I was all over the place. And so in hindsight, I should have done something much sooner, but I was too much of a coward to break out of that. And so she was the one that ended up making that decision for both of us. We sold our house and we were looking to move to a bigger house.
Mm.
And we were just in rented accommodation. And for the first time, there was nothing tying us together for about 10 years. And so it was, oh, we are completely free now if we want to be. And so we went our separate ways. And I always was inspired by your story around, staying close with your ex-partners. And I tried that, but it didn't work for us for a number of reasons, which I won't all get into now. But I did at least attempt to go down that route because I'd never even considered that before. But just off the back of that relationship, a number of losses happened. So that relationship died. My favorite dog in the world died as well, little Lucky. And my grandma died all within the period of, I don't know, about 10 weeks. And the house was gone. And I was 35 and just living in my parents' like tiny little box room. It's like, fuck, that's bad. That's, something really hit me hard. I was like, shit, life changed really quickly. And then, we spoke about this last time, but for the viewers, I found this crazy Dutch Iceman called Wim Hof, and something inside me compelled me to book not a one-way flight, book a ticket to go and see him. And this is just as he was taking off. I think he'd been on Rogan a few months before, and just jumping into the ice water, huffing and puffing, seeing visualizations of what I don't know, is it God? Is it DMT? I don't know. I saw all these crazy visualizations. I was weeping and just had this massive transformational experience.
Was this in
And
Poland?
this was in Poland, yeah, on the Czech border on Mount Śnieżka. So if anyone's not seen the documentary yet, there's a Vice documentary on YouTube that's free. It's about 40 minutes long, and it's there. So you go to Wim's house and jump in the pool and climb a mountain in your underwear and all that
Right.
good stuff, and be around a load of other people and like hugging and eye contact and eating food together. And I'd lost all my friends through the marriage. It'd been one of these kind of all-encompassing codependent relationships where everybody else, it was really hard to get out and do things, and so I'd been very isolated for a number of years. And then to go
And
from that to be
what were you
around,
doing for a living then? What was your work?
I worked for a big energy company in the UK called British Gas, and I was there for like 15 years.
So it was
And
like one
so
of
I was just
these,
in the office.
right? It was one of these jobs where like it's secure, decent pay, but you're kind of locked in and there's no
Yeah.
meaning.
And it's the energy company that's destroying the planet. And here's the really messed up thing, which I know you'll be like, oh, you have levels. So I was a level 8 when I started, and when you get promoted, you become a level 7, and then
Mm.
they trick you through this. And I was thinking maybe one day I'll become a level 6, and you fight. I remember I eventually got the level 6 after about 10 years, and I got a $4,000 pay rise, and I was like, that didn't really seem worth it, this magical thing. But yeah, but if you get a level 5, then you get a company car, and so it's all
Oh,
these like
yeah,
mystical things. And it's
right.
only now that I've been able to, and Joe Rogan does a wonderful thing about it. You don't even realize it's a game, or you don't even realize it's a trap. And I didn't even realize it was a trap. It was designed in that way to keep you going. But yes, I was in this meaningless. To be fair, at the same time, I learned so much. I learned communication skills. I learned how to sell. I learned customer services. I learned how to lead people. So it was a big education. I'm a different human from the human that started that company in 2004. but there's no like, I don't know, golden nugget at the end of it. It's just retirement. You know, you're never
Yeah.
going to do anything else. You're not really changing people's lives. But I did learn a really good skill set, which has taken me forward to where I am today. So I'm very grateful for that. But I'm also really grateful that I was able to get out. So the Wim Hof thing was the start of that, and me going, oh, because everyone's like, that's really weird. You're going away by yourself. Nobody goes away by themselves. It's like, oh, maybe I'm a bit weird. Because you may have spoken about this. People say like you spend all of your life trying to fit in, and then when you do fit in, you want to kind of stand out. And so I was at that point where I'd been spent all my life desperately trying to fit in, and now in this kind of current epoch, I'm desperately trying to stand out. But it's really weird because I was never like that before. But the Wim Hof thing was just like, holy shit, there's some magic out there. You can change your breath and you can see colors and lights and all this sort of stuff. And you meet this guy, this magical guru guy, crazy dude. And he's like playing guitar and drinking beers and singing and dancing and all this sort of stuff. And that was the real start of it. But then and we can jump into any of these bits, but it went from that to me going back to work. And my boss, who said to me, really had my best interests at heart, I think, he's like, look, because I was ready to quit because Wim had asked me to do a documentary with him. He's like, come and do Mount Kilimanjaro. We're going to do it in 21 hours. You're going to film it, because I told him I've got a film production background. You're going to film it and you're going to be there and do it. I was like, oh, that's amazing. And that didn't happen, unfortunately. But I was telling my boss I'm going to quit and I'm going to do that. And he's like, look, don't do anything. Just take the weekend, really calm, have a real think about what you're trying to do. And for the right reasons and the wrong reasons, I got back to work Monday and I was like, yeah, I'll probably keep my job. My job's probably a bit safer. You know, that's a bit crazy to do that. And it took me another couple of years to really get ready to leave my job. It was when I then, I did a Tony Robbins conference in London, and he has this visualization exercise called the Dickens process. And it takes about 2 or 3 hours. And there's 13,000 of you in the room. And so this is on like day 3, I think, out of a 4-day seminar, and you're absolutely knackered because you've been there 12 hours a day. And so he's getting you to think about all the things that are holding you back in life. And, if you go forward 2 years and you haven't changed these things, what's that going to do for you? And let's go forward 5 years and 10 years. And I'm butchering this, like, 3-hour process. Everyone's crying and upset. And he's like, imagine if you then removed this and did the things you wanted to do. And I was like, I need to quit my job. And it was just the message that came back. So that Monday, I then went to work and I handed my notice in, and that was 14 years into that career. And I was like, I'm done, I'm out. And that's when me and Nina bought one-way tickets out of the country and sold the bed and sold the car and just went traveling around the world just before the pandemic, about a year before. So we picked the right year. So that's kind of the overarching thing. But somewhere in the middle of all that's the Camino as well. So I did the Camino in between all of that, and that's kind of how the timeline fits in.
You used the phrase earlier when we were talking about the whole aborted video thing that we were working on. You said the universe spoke to us. And I think a lot about the universe speaking to us, and like, how do we know when the universe, like, how do we interpret what the universe is saying? Like, I don't know. I was just talking with Anya about this the other day. We drove from LA to Crestone. We have these 17-hour conversations. And one of the things we were talking about was how something can happen and it seems clear that the universe is sending you a message.
Yeah.
But the message, so I'll give you an example. In 1989, there was a woman that I had been seeing for years, off and on. We kept trying to make it work. And then we'd get together, and, it was one of those things where from a distance, it was ideal. But then you get up close and it's like, oh, shit, there's this and there's that. And, she did this and she says this. And it just, like, in close proximity, it didn't really work. The sex was great, but everything else was kind of difficult. And then we would, and also, and I don't mean to trivialize it. It wasn't just sex. It was like soul to soul. It worked, but 2 people living in an apartment together, it didn't work. And so we kept, as we went through our 20s, we would, separate, and we'd grow a year or two. We'd be like, I think I'm ready to make that work now. And I haven't met anyone who's even close to her in terms of that soul thing.
Yeah.
So I think we've worked out. She's matured. I've matured. Let's try again. And I spent my 20s doing this back and forth. Anyway, I moved to San Francisco and to try again with her. And we rented an apartment. And the day we were moving into the apartment, literally, you may have heard me tell this story before. I'm a buddy of mine and I are with the sofa going through the front door into the apartment, and the fucking earthquake hits. The big one, the one where the bridge fell and all that shit.
Wow.
Literally moving into the apartment, and the fucking walls, the plaster's falling out of the walls, and the windows are all smashing, and we're like, and we drop the sofa and we run out on the street because it was a ground floor apartment and we were afraid the whole building was going to come down. I mean, that's the universe saying something, right? Now, at the time, what I interpreted that as was the universe saying, okay, are you willing to work for this? It's not going to be easy. You're going to move into this apartment and there's going to be plaster dust everywhere and they're going to have to fix the windows. But if you work your way through this, you're going to come out on the other side and it's going to be fantastic. And now I look at it, it's like the universe is saying, dude, what the fuck is wrong with you? What are you doing? You've tried this 5 times with this woman. It doesn't work. Move the fuck on, you know? So it's a funny thing. The universe speaks, but it's almost like it speaks in a way where we can hear whatever we want to hear at the moment. So how did
Yeah.
you know, like in your divorce and in quitting the job and with Wim Hof, and like, how did you know what was true? You know, like how did you sense the I mean, how were you confident in what the message was, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Mm. Well, the marriage one was not my choice, but it felt right. I don't know, man. You know, part of me.
But
Let's go
wait,
back to Steve
you
Jobs again.
you say it wasn't your choice, but
Yeah,
also you know when a relationship isn't working.
yeah, yeah.
And you
That's true.
said,
Yeah, that's true. I
so
knew it
it's
was
like,
done. Yeah, I couldn't end it. Yeah.
yeah.
So we spoke about Steve before we hit record, Steve Jobs, and he has this wonderful thing he said that I think it was in the Harvard address where he says you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can only connect them looking backwards.
Mm.
And the more I have that on my little playlist of things, and that comes up every now and again. And I've saved that whole audio as one of my MP3s. And every time I hear that, it's at a different point in my life. And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, the dots have changed, you know, and I can look back and see them. Going forward though, I don't know, man. I don't know if it's just if I could really say I knew at that point, or maybe just like magnetically it was just a little bit more nudged and I just went off that way a little bit, and at the time maybe didn't even really know. Like I would never go and book to Poland to go and see some guy and jump in an ice bath, but something compelled me. But I don't know if consciously I'd thought it through and really
Right.
analyzed it and done a to-do list. It just kind of happened. And maybe it's about getting out your own way a little bit. I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I guess if we can figure that out, we'd be millionaires.
Well,
Or a lot
I
happened.
mean, I do think it's the $1 million question, right? Like, how do we know what the message is? Because, you know, clearly quitting your job was the thing to do, but when you thought about
Mm,
it for a weekend, you reconsidered and ignored the message coming
mm,
into you,
yeah,
right? But
yeah,
the message, you know, buy a ticket to Poland and go fucking stand in ice water with this crazy Dutch dude. You heard that one and you listened to that one. You didn't think about it
yeah,
for the weekend and say, oh, what am I doing? That's 500 pounds I could spend on something else. And,
yeah,
you know, you followed through on that one. I just, when I imagine people listening to this, I feel like there are so many people who are in that position that you were in, where it's like, fuck, this doesn't feel right, but how do I know it's time to leave? How do I know it's time to make it that decision? How do I stop second guessing myself? How do I
yeah.
sense that I'm on? I remember reading, you know, when I was roughly that age, early 30s, and I think everyone is kind of like trying to, you know, I think you go through your 20s fucking up and making mistakes and pretending you know what you're doing, and then
Mm,
somewhere in your 30s you start to actually figure out who you are, and then I think that's when the real moment of truth comes, because either you are going to stick to the mistakes you made in your 20s, or you're going to have the humility and courage to say, fuck, I was wrong, and
Mm.
start over, which is really hard, right? But it only gets harder. So better to do it as soon as possible. Anyway, I remember reading, have you read Carlos Castaneda? You know who he was?
No,
He
no.
was a really interesting guy. He was an anthropologist, and he wrote this book. I think the first book was called The Teachings of Don Juan. And he claimed to have gone to Mexico and met this shaman who had magical powers and could, sort of like reappear in different places in space. And he had all these really interesting teachings. And Castaneda wrote about his experiences with this guy later. Um, it was basically proven that he was making it up, because he was taking, some traditions from one tribe and teachings from a different tribe and sort of mixing them all together. And he claimed it was real, but it wasn't really real. And, so it turned into this whole thing. But he was one of the most famous writers alive in the 70s. Um, anyway, apparently Castaneda says to him at one point, he says, all paths lead to the same place, nowhere. So you don't choose a path based upon where it goes. You choose a path based upon how you feel when you're on it, right? Because when you're on the right path, it fills your heart, and you feel like every day is rich with meaning. And when you're on the wrong path, it drains your heart, and every day you feel weaker and weaker and weaker. That's the only way to know when you're on the right path, not looking, okay, where's this going to lead me? Fame, fortune, happiness, power, whatever it is. That's the wrong way to judge your path. You can only judge it by how it feels under your feet.
Yeah, love that.
Anyway,
That's
yeah,
it's I would listen a lot to Alan Watts,
yeah.
and in particular he has this one thing which is like people say they often, he says, I speak to groups of students and often say I want to be writers and poets and ride horses all day, but I can't make any money that way. And he goes, if you spend your time chasing the money, I'm butchering this by the way, if you do things you don't enjoy to earn money, to keep doing things you don't enjoy, then that's completely stupid, is the way he says it. And so better to live an out of doors life, a life where it has meaning, and it's a lovely, beautiful thing. And I'd have that plus the Steve Jobs thing and a couple of other things. So clearly I knew deep inside I was on the wrong path. I would walk every day to this corporate job. I was at the same office for over 10 years. It was 14 years in total for the company. I can't remember. I worked out how many thousands of times I'd walk through that front door. And every time a little bit of my soul would die as I'd go through that front door.
You pay the toll.
Yeah. And it was a spinny door. So you'd go through it. You'd have to really push it as well to get in. And every time it's like, and it was a draining job because I'm very introverted and I was a senior manager, so I was in charge of a lot of people, and you have to be a bit more extroverted because you're in front of people. Hey, how you doing? Or we need to have coffee later and talk about this. All that kind of schmoozy rubbish. At least that's how I felt I had to do it. And I was always getting told, you're too soft for this job, you're too accommodating, you're too nice. And yet I kept getting promoted, so that was always a bit confusing. And eventually I was like, I'm just going to be me. It took me a few years to get that way. I'll just be me, and I did all right in that company. And it made things, but I always knew it was the wrong path. And so on those walks to work, I would be listening to Alan Watts or Joe Rogan or one of those things, one of those little clips on YouTube where it's like Joe Rogan talking about the society trap and all those sorts of things. And so that would my voice inside was going, something's wrong here. Now, whether I ever felt about it that openly and ever really thought about it, or just went, yeah, shut up, we'll deal with that when we're old, but there was definitely that voice. And then just would I be where I am now if we hadn't sold that house and gone through that divorce? I don't know. And this is something that keeps me up sometimes, like going, would I have had the gumption to make those changes? I don't know. Is there a metaverse version of me that's still married and fucking miserable out there in a different, version? And I'm the one that got that lucky break and got out. I don't know. These are things I think about a lot, but I'm very grateful because if those events hadn't happened, then I wouldn't have had my little boy and all those sort of things. So, all paths lead nowhere. Yeah. Interesting.
Lucky break is an interesting phrase, right? Because it was a breakup,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It was the
Yeah.
the breaking of a relationship that
Yeah.
you loved her and
Yeah.
you had a life together, and it broke.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that allowed you to move on to something much better for you.
Yeah.
Um, so lucky break. Yeah,
Yeah. Interesting.
interesting phrase. So tell
Yeah.
me about the Camino. I think last time we didn't really talk about it much, and that
Yeah.
was in my notes. And I was like, fuck, I wanted to pick his
Yeah.
brain about the Camino Santiago. So how did that happen? What inspired you to do that?
So funnily enough, still while I was with my wife, and she would go out at nights, I would watch some travel films. I'd watch the one about the guy that died in Alaska. I always forget the name when I talk to you, but you know what I'm talking about. He died in the bus in
Oh,
Alaska.
oh, Into the Wild.
Into the Wild. I
Christopher
watched Into the
McCandless.
Wild.
Yeah.
I watched A Walk in the Woods, you know, with Robert Redford, and all these like travel things. I was like, oh, I want to be a traveler, you know. And one of them I watched was called The Way by Martin Sheen,
Oh, I've
and
seen that.
his and it's
Yeah.
and ironically, when you're on the Camino, so many Americans are there because of that film, and I was one
Uh,
of them. I saw that and I thought, because I'd love to do your trails in America, but I'm scared of the crackheads and the bears, and so I don't think I'll be I'll be that's what I've heard is the problem on those trails. I'm
Crackheads
obviously
and
being silly.
bears. Yeah.
But I was like, oh, you can do this in Europe. Oh, that's pretty cool. And it's Spain. It's really close. And so I just did a little bit of research. And then after the Wim Hof stuff, again, it was just a feeling of I feel like I need to walk. And I'm still processing my dog, and I'm still processing my nana and my life and all that sort of jazz. And so the Wim Hof was in the November, December, and in that May, the following May, I booked a ticket out to south of France, and then we crossed the Pyrenees. I say we, it was me. I did it all by myself. And it was that film that inspired it. And I read a couple of books after. And one of my favorite quotes I read in one of these books, it was an Australian author who'd done the Camino. And he said the Camino is like a life within a life. And I really like that. You have the initial birth, and then you grow up, you become a teenager, you do some silly things on the Camino. And eventually you face the inevitable end, the death of the Camino. You know it's going to end. You know it has to end. And it was always about the whole journey that happened. And I loved that. And I remember and obviously we can dig into the Camino a bit, but I remember just fast forwarding to the end, getting really sad that it was going to be over soon, even though I was exhausted. But yeah, if anyone's on the fence about it, it was one of the most like wonderful experiences of my life to go there by myself, to make friends. There's about a group of 8 of us, all came individually apart from 2 Irish boys who were friends, and we became this little pack, and we would travel along the Camino together, and we would find the hotels together, and we would have dinner together at night and play games, and we came really, really close. And it's something weird that happens when you're walking with somebody for 10 hours a day, and you know, sometimes eye to eye contact can be quite intense. You know, you go for a date and you're sitting opposite each other, and it's like, right, we need to share stuff. But when you're kind of side by side and you're just walking, you're gonna have a beer, and you know, you're all sleeping in the same dorm together. You get this. Well, I felt this way. I had this like a 10-year friendship put down to about 30 days. You're sharing everything and everything. So we all became really, really close. And then towards the end, we all started to go off because we had different places we needed to get to, and so that all happened. But we were silly, you know. We were drinking some mornings first thing in the morning, and one of the times we found like a little hatch in one of our rooms, and we opened it, and there was like a backpack in there. We thought, oh my god, they're killing the backpackers and putting the backpacks in there. And then the woman found out, and she was going crazy at us, and she was threatening to kick us out at midnight out there, and she was telling me off, and I was like, I'm 35 years old. I haven't been told off for like 20 years. This is ridiculous, you know. And so we were, you know, so I had that like childhood phase of being a bit silly. And then we got to the inevitable end. But it's a beautiful experience of just walking. And I think about what it satisfies in like human beings. You know more than anyone about hunter gatherers. But I think I was in a community. I was in daylight. I was sharing stories. I was moving my body all day. I had purpose. I kind of had like a tribe where we were looking after each other, and a load of other stuff, and it just kind of ticked like loads of like human boxes, and it just felt like the most natural state to be in, always walking somewhere as a group. And
Right.
so it's very addictive, and my plan is to do it every 10 years now, so I've got 4 years left till the next one, and so I'd love to do that every 10, and eventually, you know, take my son and all that sort of jazz. But it's a wonderful, beautiful experience, and one of the most powerful things I will say is you are never alone because there's thousands of people doing it. you're sharing a room together, but when you're walking, you can very quickly have peace and quiet. But the minute you want to just talk to somebody, you just go, "Hey, why are you walking the Camino?" And I think without exception, every person had a story, and
Mm.
every person said, "My wife has died, or I've got cancer, or I've just lost my job, or I've lost my house, and I'd gone through a divorce, and my dog had died, and blah blah blah." And so everybody had something like that, and not always that profound, but they always had a reason why they'd taken 35 days off their job or quit their job, because it's a big undertaking to do. And so instantly there's this huge connection. And when I got home, I got a little bit like depressed because, or just sad, maybe depressed is too strong, because suddenly that community had gone. And I'd walk down the street and you don't even get eye contact off your neighbor, and I was like,
Yeah.
shit, this is really bad. And so I even to this day, I crave that community because
Yeah.
it's not here. I don't even, we've got a new neighbor that's moved in 2 doors down. I've not even seen them yet. They've been there 3 months, and
Mm.
it's just sad. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a whistle stop of the Camino. Yeah.
So when you say you want to do it every 10 years, do you want to do the Camino or will you do a different path?
I mean, I did the most popular one, the Frances, which is the one that goes across the Pyrenees and goes down. And I don't even know, maybe 200,000 people do it, or did it last when I did it. I think it's doubled since then,
Mm.
pre-COVID. But yeah, I would like to do the Portuguese one. I hear there's one in Rome now. Just the idea of taking a different path is, yeah, the Portuguese one's meant to be really beautiful. The Norte is meant to be wonderful as well. But I think it's just the idea of taking some time out of your life to have that life within the life. It's
Right.
just really appealing. And there's that other piece around all you've got is what's on your back, which is
Right.
just a wonderful place to be as well. And
Right.
I've got two pairs of pants which I washed in the sink, socks, a pair of trousers, and life is just much simpler that way. Although I still had like 20 kilograms, which was way too much. I had to dump loads of stuff because I over prepped massively. And I saw these retirees from England, and they had little day packs. And I was, where's all your stuff? I was like, yeah, we've got our pants in here, we've got a couple of t-shirts, and they'd done it before. And I was like,
Right.
I was so jealous because you've done the travel so many times, and I still made the same mistake again when we went traveling in 2018. Like you
Yeah.
pack all the crap, and
Yeah.
Wim Hof actually says you pack your anxieties in your backpack, and it's so
Yeah.
true. It's like,
Yeah.
what if I need a spare
Right.
phone battery?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's anxiety about what if, and it's also it's a scarcity based vision of the world, right? It's like if I need it, I won't be able to find it wherever I am, so I need to bring it with me, right? As opposed to whatever I need, it'll be there.
If
Or I
I,
don't actually need it, I
yeah,
can wait a while. It's
yeah,
Yeah, you're right. I've traveled a lot and every time I overpack. It's like the hardest lesson to learn
yeah,
over and over. It's like, damn, I did it again. I did
yeah.
it again. Yeah, the best thing that happened to me on my first big international trip was when I got robbed and my backpack went from about 50 pounds to about 15 pounds. And I was like, and I didn't need any of that shit.
Yeah,
Thank you, thief,
yeah.
for stealing all that.
I thought that was going to happen to me because I knew your story, and this is real. Part of me was like, maybe I'll get robbed, and touch. This was the wonderful thing as well. What is it, Einstein that says you got to choose to live in a safe universe or a dangerous universe.
Mm,
We went in, nothing happened. We were out of the country traveling for a year, and nothing. I remember even at one point we lent these little kids in Jordan Nina's quite expensive like DSLR camera because they wanted to take some pictures of us. And in my head I was like, oh, I think they're going to run away with that camera. And they just took some pictures and gave the camera back. And I was like, wow, so many people I know would never have even bothered. They would never have even trusted those little kids to do that. And
mm,
so I had my laptop with me. I was convinced I would not come home with that laptop. It's like, there's no way that laptop's going all around the world. I'm still using that laptop to today. So yeah, I think the biggest thing that struck me was like most people are really good people. And that was a
yeah.
really nice thing. And they got a lot less than you have. And they're just really nice, good people. Like we smashed a motorbike up in Myanmar. And I was like, we're in big trouble now. This is going to cost us a fortune. And I
Right.
think they wanted like $5 just, and we got the motorbike the next day. It had some like tape around the indicators and some other bits, and they would just give it us back. And I was like, wow, they could have really took they really could have took advantage of us there. And they were like, no, it's fine. So, yeah, every time I was just surprised about how beautiful and gracious everybody was. And it makes me think about my own life and how tight I am with money sometimes, or
Mm.
scared about something, and think, why is it because we've got more to lose that we're tight like that? And I don't know, it's a funny one. But yeah, good people all around this planet. I think we forget that sometimes.
Well, I think it's because we're taught to think of the universe as being stingy. And so we need to be stingy in response. Whereas people who live in places like Myanmar, or, most of the world, they depend on each other. They can't possibly have everything they're going to need.
Mm,
So they don't even try. And instead they develop an understanding of the world where if I need it, someone will be around and they'll give it to me, just like I would give it to them. And,
mm,
so it feels from outside, it's like an impoverished view, but in the
mm.
end, you feel richer because you feel like you live in a universe that provides for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in light of all this, maybe it's time to rethink this thing about bears and crack addicts,
Yes.
and then come and
Yeah.
do some hiking over in the States. I'll show you around.
Okay.
I've spent a lot of time in the woods here, and I've never been attacked by a bear or a crack addict.
There's still time.
But I do have my bear crack addict spray just in
You do.
case, it works on both.
Yeah.
Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, I want to do Camino de Santiago sounds fantastic to me, and obviously I love Spain.
Mm,
But I think it's like there's just too many people and it's too much of a thing. But I have heard about similar pilgrimage trails through the Italian Alps that sound really
mm,
nice.
yes.
I just love the idea, especially, Camino de Santiago, it's a lot of dorm rooms and young people, and yeah, and kind of, I don't need to be listening to, 22-year-olds yakking all night. Um, I like
Yeah.
the idea of going from Italian village to village and like actually having a room with a bed and having some really good Italian dinner after walking all day,
Yeah. Yeah.
a
That
little
sounds
more
nice.
high end.
Yeah. I think
That's
we're getting to that stage now as well, because we stayed
yeah.
in some pretty ropey dorm rooms, and one of the big problems you have on the Camino is bed bugs, and somehow I avoided that. But
Mm.
it's a really and they're lovely little hitchhikers, aren't they? Because they just jump from place to place. But the Camino from Granada is meant to be pretty isolated in south of.
Mm.
And the guy that wrote the book from Australia who did it, he says like he didn't even see any pilgrims till like the last 5 days, because he took this
Oh yeah.
this really rare, and it was only when he got to Santiago, he's like, oh my God, this is ridiculous, because they were just flying in hundreds or thousands a day,
Mm.
coming in. And so he hadn't experienced that piece. But my heart is in Italy. I'm half Italian. I speak
Mm.
not a word of Italian, unfortunately, but my mum's side's Italian. And so you can't beat the food, you can't beat the coffee, I think. It's
Yeah.
just a beautiful country. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Um, so let's talk about the breath work. So I mean, it's really interesting because I think, as you know, I know Wim pretty well and have hung out with him and his family a bunch of times. And you're right, he's an extremely inspiring guy, and he's wild. He is legitimately fucking wild. Like unfiltered, pure energy. I mean, I don't know where the energy comes from. It's
Right.
it's incredible. I guess it comes from the cold in some ways, but I kind of feel like the cold, I don't know nearly as much about cold exposure as you do, or breath work, obviously. Um, but with the cold, I kind of feel like, it might align with what we were saying earlier about the universe speaks and we choose what to hear. Like I'm sure there are immunological responses.
Mm,
It's a tonic to your body, it's a shock to your
mm,
body, which is a good thing. You definitely feel better all day if you've like had that cold exposure. But I think a lot of it is also placebo, which is
Mm,
not to dismiss it.
mm,
Placebo is a real thing and it's very, very strong. But I feel like for me, a lot of the value of cold exposure is simply the process of saying, I want to do this. I know it's going to fucking hurt, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then I do it. And then I get out and I feel empowered, not by the cold, but by the fact that I did something I didn't really want to do.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So I feel like it could be anything. It could be 100 push-ups, or it could
yeah,
be, drinking something that tastes horrible. It could be anything where you're overcoming yourself,
yes,
you know,
100%. Yeah,
um,
we we
especially if other people are involved, like you said with the Tony Robbins thing.
yes.
If it's a group experience, it's even stronger.
Mm. I think there's something that has to be physical though for that as well. And I'll tell you why. Because well, first of all, I don't. I went to Wim for the cold. I always make this as a joke on my podcast. I went for the cold, but I stayed for the breath work. So I don't teach the cold, and I
Mm.
haven't been in the cold much recently. I've got a bathtub outside, and recently it takes me a while to build up to it. So I probably need to go back in soon. But after the Wim experience, I was so desperate to get that feeling again. I was going to rebook back up, and my friend was like, "You're just going to get the same feeling again." But I got that feeling two other times. Once was abseiling down the hospital in Oxford and going over the edge. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the Wim Hof thing. It's like a leap of faith. I'm really scared. And the minute I went over the edge and the rope caught me, I felt really good. Because it's like that. We spoke about this, I think, about the divers, and they would jump off the boards and you'd see the fear in their faces, the ones that jumped and didn't jump. And so I would lean over the edge. And the other time I got that was when I did some tombstoning or cliff jumping in the Philippines. And I was at the top of this cliff, this 15-meter cliff, for about 20 minutes. And I was with a group, a guide, and
Yeah.
the whole thing's been filmed. Poor Nina had to film the whole thing. And the only bit I put on YouTube was me jumping over the cliff, obviously.
Right,
But
right.
I was like
Not the
getting up to the edge
19
and going
minutes.
back. The rest of it's pretty boring. And they said to me, you can't half-arse this. You can't just step over the cliff because the rocks at the bottom will kill you. You have to
Uh,
run and jump. It's like,
right,
fuck.
right.
So you have to really commit to it. You can't, So I was like, go to the edge, not to the edge. And eventually, I remember the minute my feet left the edge, I felt so free. And I was
Mm,
like, oh, thank you. And I knew that if I hadn't done that, it would have haunted me till today. So
mm.
there's just something about, I don't know, maybe this sounds too extreme. Is it putting yourself in some sort of physical danger? I don't think so. But maybe it's a simulated version of that, because when you go into the ice water, your body thinks it's dying. I'm pretty sure it thinks
Yeah,
it's trying to keep you alive,
yeah,
and you're scared of that.
yeah. No, I think it is. And I think you're right. I think we can trick ourselves, right? Like, I love doing things that feel dangerous but aren't,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you get that payoff without the risk.
Yes.
So yeah, jumping off something high is like, that's intense. That
Yeah.
is really intense,
Yeah.
because I think you're right. I think the minute, now maybe you felt relief, but the minute I commit and I'm in the air, I feel my body saying that was a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
That was just a really bad decision. And then you survive it and it's like, oh my God, I'm immortal. This is
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what else? What else have you done that you said there were two times? Oh, oh, abseiling. So
The abseiling. Yeah.
abseiling is rappelling, right? Is that
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Going backwards off it. There was another time. I don't know if I spoke to you about this previously, but I after Wim Hof, I thought I'm a mountain climber, and so I
Oh,
decided to climb
you told me
Snowdon.
that. Tell
Fucking
that
hell.
story again. That was
So
great.
so
Yeah.
so we me and my best friend, who's my best friend to today, Scott. Me and him met on the Wim Hof thing like 7 years ago,
Uh,
and we both climbed Mount Snezker, Polish mountain, right? Must be a dangerous mountain. Must be like, basically it's Everest, yeah.
and you're
And
in
so
your
we
fucking
climbed that, and we're like,
underwear.
in our underwear. So we're like, oh, we can climb any mountain. So she was like, well, why don't we do the three peaks in our underwear? So the English, the Welsh, and the Scottish mountains on Boxing Day. this is like 10 days after Wim Hof. And we're like, well, yeah, we can do anything. And so my girlfriend, who's only been my girlfriend for a few weeks at this time, she's going, who's going to drive you? And we're like, oh, we'll drive ourselves. Who's going to look after you? Like, no, we're going to be fine. And she's like, she said after, she's like, I didn't really know you well enough to like tell you you're being a dick. So she just kind of let it happen and just assumed I knew what I was doing. Obviously I didn't. And we got to the first mountain, Snowdon, at 4 p.m. So it's almost dark. It's on Boxing Day. We saw the last two people leave the mountain, and we're like, huh, we're the last ones. We didn't really know we're the last ones, but we were the last ones on the mountain. Had a little headlamp. I left my spare headlamp in the car. I think I don't need this. I'll come back and get my food later. Left everything in the car, and we just started climbing. And we got lost a few times. I've got some footage of it somewhere. And we got lost. We couldn't speak properly. Our mouths stopped kind of working because it was so cold. We're in our pants. The snow's there, and it's it's Boxing Day. And there's a couple of times we got very close to the edge, and we just lost our way. And we ended up on, and this is Snowdon. You can walk Snowdon, and we were grappling on all fours for about an hour and a half. And I remember grabbing some mud and pulling, and the mud slipped and it rolled down the hill and nearly hit my friend in the face. And we were like, oh my God. So we just focused on getting to the top of this hill, and we had no idea if it was going to be like a sheer rock face or not. So we're like, sod it, let's just keep going. And somehow we got to the top, and it turned out we'd moved to a completely different mountain that was on the side. And we were lucky, but we were at the top and it was all glassy ice. And we tried to ring for mountain rescue. My phone died because it was so cold.
And you're in your
I
underwear?
in my underwear. So I put my clothes back on again. And the minute you put your clothes on, you start shivering. And then for some reason, Scott said, let's go this way. And we went that way, and we found the railway track that takes you down, and we were fine. And so I then went into really chilled. Oh my God, we're amazing. We survived. And then he went into like some sort of PTSD, and he just wouldn't talk for about 2 hours on the way down. So it was a really weird way that we both dealt with it. Very lucky, very stupid. And then it was only later we found out people die on that mountain all the freaking time. They die on that mountain in daylight. And I had no respect for this mountain at all. I was like, it's a British mountain. Britain's safe. It's basically a hill. And no, a handful of people die every year on that mountain. Experienced climbers, and two idiots went up there in their pants and somehow survived to tell the tale. So yeah, that's the story. And but that one didn't give me the Wim Hof like, ooh, it gave me more of a deep respect for nature. I think that's what I got from that mountain.
Yeah, even without bears or crackheads.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That should be the title of my new book.
Bears and crackheads.
Yeah.
your travel adventure book. So talk to me about breath work. What why does that compel you so much, and why did you decide you want to teach it, and how's that going? And give us a plug for your various enterprises here. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so Wim Hof got me to do huffing and puffing. And when I had no idea about breath work, zero. So I'm huffing and puffing, and I'm crying, and I'm laughing, and Wim's voice is so compelling. And so we went through this whole 5-day process. I saw what I can only describe as another entity, and we had this like communication, but we didn't really speak. It was like an I, and I'm obviously going through this quite quickly, but at the time it was so profound. And now it's like a memory of a memory of a memory of a memory I'm telling. But yeah. I remember like, holy shit. It was the first time I'd gone from being like an atheist to, I think there's something else out there. So that was the whole Wim Hof experience. And then I started making YouTube videos about it, and this is like 2016. There was no Wim Hof videos back then on YouTube. Now, thousands of them. And so people started watching them, and I already had a background in video, and I already would post on YouTube, but that was because I made wedding videos. And so I'd post like little clips of the weddings I'd filmed and stuff like that. Anyway, so this perfect thing happened I was really curious about breath work. I knew how to edit videos, and, and I knew a little bit about YouTube. And then I just got obsessed, and I was down the Wim Hof route for a number of years. And I remember thinking that's pretty much the only breathing exercise there is, right? There's nothing else. And then people would ask me loads of questions on YouTube, mouth or nose, this or that. I was like, I don't know. And so I was thinking about this before I got ready for this podcast here, actually. I've done this in a really arse about backwards way. I kind of went into the public sphere with something. and then I've kind of learnt my way through it over the last like 6, 7
Mhm.
years. And it was only really during the pandemic I got really, really serious with it. I was like, I need to know the science of this. I need to learn. And I did a load of like certifications and different things. But then it was the podcast that really grew my knowledge, because I got to like pick the brains of like the top experts like
Right.
every week. I'm getting like one-on-one access, like Joe's had, like you've had. And I'm getting to pick these people's brains. I go, why does that happen? And I'm speaking to doctors and surgeons and yoga instructors and authors and everything in between. And everyone's got their own flavor of breathing, which is really interesting. And so I've now moved away from the Wim Hof stuff. I don't really go down the hyperventilation route now. I teach a lot more what I'd call like functional breathing, which is like learning to use your nose again, learning to deal with like sleep apnea, learning to deal with asthma, learning to slow your breath rates down, helping like athletes improve their performance, helping like people with stress and anxiety. So it's all that sort of jazz, because the Wim Hof stuff is fantastic, but it is I like to call it like a simulated panic attack. And so if
Right.
anyone's had a panic attack, it feels a bit close. It's a bit awkward. I've got a friend that can't go near it. And what I've learned over my kind of few years of this now is most of us need to just chill the hell out. And that Wim Hof stuff has a huge place, and I still do it, but I do it probably once every couple of months at most. For me, it's about the slow breathing, the relaxing breathing. There's all these different breathing techniques that make your heart pump differently, change the waves in your brain, build up your resilience to stress. And so I've gone down that route now, but I'm still very much got one foot in the crazy, the spiritual camp. So for example, last year I got invited to do hot water rebirthing. I don't know if you've ever come across this.
Mm-mm.
So you're in a hot tub. Have you, who was the guy? Stan Groff.
Stanislav
I always forget the guy's
Grof.
name.
Yeah, yeah, I've met
Thank you.
him. He also, I was going
Oh,
to ask you about holotropic breath work, which
okay.
is sort of his version of the Wim Hof
Yeah.
thing, right? Yeah.
So there was him. There was a guy called Leonard. Oh, I forget his name. That's terrible. Leonard. I need to go back on my website and find that. But the Leonard guy, he was the guy that invented the hot water rebirthing. And so we were in Glastonbury where he did that, and the woman took me through it. And you're doing a hyperventilation exercise similar to holotropic breathing, and you get into the water, and they're playing the noise of the womb. So it's whoa, 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 whoa. And you're hyperventilating, but very relaxed. It's not like the huffing and puffing of hop. It's more like you're doing that. Eyes are closed. The water's the same temperature as your body. You then put a snorkel in and you go face down into the water, and there's two of them holding you. And uh, you, basically, I could hear like what I thought was like a woman screaming, and I was like, "That's a bit rude." While I'm doing my rebirthing, and then
No.
it was me, and it was me on the exhale. At the end of the exhale was a scream, and so eventually, so I'd gone into, I don't know, a trance, a hypnosis. I still don't know. And in the back of my head, I was watching the whole thing, Chris, and I was like, "This is fucking weird. I can't wait to tell my friend about this." And I'd lost control of my hands. They became little T-Rex baby hands, and they couldn't get me out of the water. They said so. Eventually, they flipped because they're squeezing your shoulders like you're going through the birth canal. So they're squeezing your shoulders. Eventually, this big bloke and the woman, they turned me around. I'm on my back, and she said I just stopped breathing for about 2 minutes, and my lips had gone blue. And she said she was getting a little bit nervous, but she let the process play itself out. And then I took a very gentle breath in, and I just started to cry. And I think I cried for about 2 hours, and I was just crying through this process. And so she put me into her shoulders, and she's like, and in this version of things, she was my mum, and she's like, she said the words to me, "You're so wanted. I'm so glad you're here." And I just burst into tears. I was like, "Oh my God." And she had to go and deal with somebody else. So eventually she passed me to another guy, and she goes, "Oh, your daddy's here now." And then he said the same things to me. So it sounds crazy as fuck, I know. But I went through this process. And eventually they put me on the grass outside. It was a sunny day, and the sun was in my face. And I was like, it was so powerful, and I couldn't handle the sun. I was just crying. And I rang my mum that night and asked her, "How was my birth?" Because I never spoke to her about it before. She's like, "Yeah, it was fine, no problems." It's like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, I was in hospital for about 6 weeks though." I was like, what do you mean? What's going on there?" And she's, "Well, I had a lot of bleeding problems, and we had to put you under this lamp for like a week because of your like jaundice and stuff." And so I was like, "Oh, I wonder if that was why." I don't know. So I had these like things, and I was maybe making connections, but the whole thing was a wonderful experience. But even like a week later, I still hadn't quite processed it. So I've got like a little gym downstairs in my garage, like a very basic gym. And whenever I did anything a little bit too physically intense, I would just start crying again. I was like, oh, this is really weird. Why is this happening? So I don't really know what to do with that process. Some people get very addicted to this. It feels like it's not done yet, and I'm going to go back and do some more at some point. But that's just like another example of where the breath can take you. It's just like there's all these different avenues it goes down. So yeah, that's hot water rebirthing in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, I met Stan Groff a few times. He's based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and he's friends with my friend Stanley Krippner. They've known each other for 50 years or so. Stan Groff was one of the first people who ever did LSD-assisted psychotherapy. He did it in Czechoslovakia
Mm,
back in the late 60s, I think. Yeah, interesting guy. Um,
mm,
Yeah, that's I've done the holotropic breath work, and I was in a room full of people, and I think this was in Costa Rica at the ayahuasca retreat center I went to, and man, people were crying and having all sorts of emotional reactions. The most I got, I felt lightheaded just from
mm,
hyperventilating, but I didn't feel any emotional release or anything. That
mm.
Have you been in float tanks? Have you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. After Rogan, that was I didn't do any breath work in there. This was years ago, but that was a lovely experience. That was very visual for me. A lot of colors and lights. Have you? I take it you've done that as well.
Yeah, quite a bit. There's a place I think it's called Float On in Portland. They're really nice guys, and they sort of, when I was living there, they said just come in when, if a tank's free, you can use it whenever you want. They just sort of gave me carte
Nice.
blanche because I couldn't afford, $50, $60 a session is quite expensive. And I understand the economics. I mean, they need to charge that much to stay in business, but
Yeah.
yeah, that was a great opportunity. So I probably did it 30, 40 times. And
Oh, nice.
because the first couple of times I was just lying there like, okay, here I am lying
Yeah.
in, it's interesting, but
Yeah.
and then as you get more comfortable with it, you go to deeper. I found it very much like where I was trying to get through meditation, but found it difficult to get there because I was always distracted by my body, like my back hurts, my knees hurt, got an itch, and this and that.
Mm,
All those physiological reminders kept pulling me away from reaching that state. But in the flow tank, it was like, wow, here I am. And, just breathing or just being, just existing. And then at the end of it, like I felt like I was waking up, but I hadn't really been asleep. You know what I
mm,
mean? It's like I'm coming out of a state that feels like an awakening, but I know that that wasn't sleep. So it's something
yeah.
different. To what extent does your work with your breath work teaching is it similar to, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of overlap between breath work and meditation, right? And do you deal with that in your teaching, or are you sort of purely physiological, not
Mm.
into this more spiritual realm?
With the teaching, we try to stick to like science-based techniques for people. That kind of, there is that spiritual element, but I stick to the science-based stuff generally. The interesting thing, the definition around breath work versus meditation, I always found really interesting, which is like with meditation, you tend to watch the breath. And I was
Mm.
always a terrible meditator. And the reason I think I got so in love with breath work is like you change the breath. And that was the bit for me is like now I'm consciously connectedly changing that breathing.
Mm.
It gives me
Right.
something to do. So I'm still technically meditating. There's one exercise I teach called breath awareness. That's probably the only meditation exercise I do teach where it's like a hand on the chest, a hand on the belly, and without judgment, we just watch the breath and observe it and see where it is and how we're feeling. I always do that with clients at the start, just so we can get kind of a base of where they are, and then we start to get under the hood and start to change things a little bit to see how that feels. But yeah, it's the whole meditation thing's very interesting. I teach a group every Saturday, and we had a lady on the other week called Vijamala Birch, and she'd been through a number of traumatic incidents in her life where she's essentially paralyzed now. And she was teaching us, we have a different guest come on each week, and she came on and she was teaching us about mindfulness. And that got me curious again about mindfulness, because she said that she had to have this dye put in her spine to see where the problems were. And she'd been on her back for months. And so they said to her in the hospital, you need to sit up for 24 hours, because if you lay down, the dye is going to go to your brain. It's going to cause you horrific pain. And so she's like, I don't know how to get through this. I've been laying for months and now they're asking me to sit. And she said she had this like moment about 3 o'clock in the morning where she's like, I can't make it. I can't get through to the, you know, to the point in the day. And she had this awakening where it was like, I don't need to, I just need to get through this moment. And then this moment, and it sounds so simple now, but after she said that story to me, I went back downstairs and I was just playing with my baby and sitting on the chair with Nina. And for the first time in like ages, I became super present, and I was just like aware, and I wasn't thinking about the future or the past. I was just in this present moment, just looking at my baby's face and, you know, looking at the sofa and all this like really like basic things. And it just kind of brought it back again for me, this thing around, hello, old friend. I've not been here for ages. It's really nice to be back here again, where I'm not thinking about, oh my God, I've got to do this podcast and do this and do that. So I don't know, that was a gift, but I don't necessarily teach it, but I am very interested by it. But yeah, we normally get people to slow their breathing down and do gentle breathing techniques. That's what most people need these days, because we're breathing too fast is the short bit.
Have you heard that? I remember reading somewhere that, what was this? Like almost all mammals have the same number of breaths in their lifetimes. And also heartbeats, because breath and heartbeat are related, obviously. And it was something like, yeah, like a mouse and an elephant have roughly the same number of heartbeats. I think it was, no, it couldn't have been. I was going to say 70,000 for some reason, but that obviously can't be right. But anyway, I'll look this up and I'll link to it in the show notes. But I remember reading this, and the idea was that, you know, an elephant's heart rate is very slow, and a mouse's heart rate is very high. And an elephant lives, 70 years or whatever it is, and a mouse lives, 6 months or whatever. But if you average them out, they correlate. So you figure out, and when I read that, I thought, well, that's the perfect excuse not to exercise a lot.
Yeah.
Like, keep my heart rate pretty low and I'll live longer. I don't think that works scientifically, but that was my takeaway.
I don't know, there's something to that, because I watched this documentary recently. It's an old BBC thing, and they're basically saying on there, you need to do like 60 seconds of exercise a day, because I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, we were brought up to think the only way to lose weight is to move your body, which obviously has some truth to it. But then I heard that old adage that you can't out exercise a bad diet. And so it gave me that new perspective, like, so why are we exercising then? So I've got like a little bike in the room next door. It's like an air bike. And I just do 3 sets of 20 seconds now, like full intensity. It's awful. You're absolutely knackered afterwards. But that 60 seconds is like plenty, I think. Like, it gets my heart going. But then I'm not on the treadmill for like 2 hours, like some people are. So I don't know. But that's interesting about the beats. And yeah, when we slow our breathing down, our heart rate starts to slow down. And we do say, like, if you want to live a really short life, breathe through your mouth and breathe really fast all the time. It's kind of the opposite of that. So yeah, that's interesting if that connection's true, though, which it could be. Mouse and elephant.
Yeah, I'll look it up. I wanted to also ask you mentioned sleep apnea earlier, and I would be irresponsible if I didn't pick your brain a little bit about that, because I have sleep apnea, and I have a machine that I use at night to breathe and all that, so I don't snore and have the blockage. But my understanding of sleep apnea is, at least in my case, that it's largely physiological, because the soft palate is, the doctor who examined me said I had an unusually large soft palate in the back of my throat. And also, because of the modern diet and kids don't chew much, a lot of us have a sort of an underdeveloped jawbone. which
Yes.
then, also creates this sort of crowding in the mouth and in the back of the throat.
Hmm.
So I've had 4 molars pulled to make room for my teeth and all that. Um, but I've also read that there are breathing exercises you can do to help the situation. So I imagine, what is that, to tighten the tissue in the back of the throat and strengthen the muscles?
We typically work on like the what we'd call like the biochemistry. So it's like your tolerance to carbon dioxide, and so we
Mm,
want to get your breathing like nice and slow and relaxed. Because like the size of your tongue, like if we put weight on, our tongue gets fat. It can like cause problems there. So we would focus on. Sometimes it's the most basic thing as well. We would use nasal strips to get the nose open. They give us like 30% more space in the nose. And we would focus on making the breathing light and gentle. And so unfortunately, it's not always a silver bullet for everything, but what we can do is we can alleviate some of the symptoms. So we never say cure, even though there's a book called The Breathing Cure, we never say it cures, we never say it cures asthma. But what we can do is we can alleviate some of the symptoms with like light, slow, and gentle breathing
mm,
techniques. Um, and Yeah, I know some people that use like the CPAP machines and stuff. We do encourage them to also put their nasal strips on sometimes and see if that helps. So unfortunately, there's probably not a cure for a lot of these things. It probably does come down to physiology as well. But yeah, there are definitely some techniques. We talk a lot about in my training around how sleep, exercise, and rest are all linked together. And so if you can fix any of those, it helps the rest. So for example, if you can make sure that when you're exercising, you are with your mouth closed, then it just means that you're breathing a little bit slower and your body's a bit more relaxed.
mhm.
And those things feed each other as well. So it's yeah, there's probably not a cure out there, unfortunately. It's probably just about alleviating the symptoms.
You ever do taping, lip
Yeah,
taping?
yeah. I've got all my stuff here for my clients. Yeah, so I've got my mouth tape here, and I've recently been using those nasal strips as well. I've
Yeah,
got
I
them here next to
saw
me. Yeah.
I
So
saw
yeah,
you
so
on
they are.
Instagram yesterday. You had
Yes.
a photo.
Yeah, because I went back to jiu-jitsu the first time after 2 years, and I was always gasping for air. And on Saturday, I was the only one that was like in control of my breath, and I was like, that's good. Another reminder that and I'm not in the best shape still, but the mouth taping is very good because it gets people to be nasal breathing, and for those that don't know, like I didn't know just a few short years ago, the mouth and nose are completely different. They do different things. The mouth is a beautiful backup, but the nose filters the air, warms the air, cools the air, sterilizes the air. There's all these different things going on, pressurizes the air. And so we want to make sure that we are using the nose basically. And one simple way to do that is a little bit of mouth tape on the old mouth.
Mm. And what do you
Mm.
think about high altitude? I'm at 8,000 feet right now, which is what,
Yeah.
2,500 meters, I think.
Yeah, so your body would most likely produce a few more red blood cells there
Yeah.
now, and so I know some athletes will do that before big events. Um, in one of my certifications, we do something called high altitude training, and it's not a pleasant exercise. It's not a relaxing exercise. It's emptying your lungs. It's taking some steps, and it's having a sip of air, a
Mm.
sip, and then another 10 steps, and then a sip of air. And you do that about 5 or 6 times, and it's really intense. But what you're doing there is you're getting your tolerance to CO2 up. So your body's better at handling those, like the high carbon dioxide levels in your body. And it's a simulated version of that. And if you use a pulse oximeter, you'll start to see your blood, your oxygen saturation start to drop. So you start to
Yeah.
get used to working on lower levels.
Yeah.
And there was a study, I think it was, you heard of EPO, right? You know what Lance Armstrong
Yeah.
was using. There was a study, I think it was like 25 really strong breath holds. And I think they got like a 23% increase in EPO. The body produced all
Mm.
this extra EPO. So there's loads of like hacks with the breath. I was speaking to a guy a little while ago that was working with the All Blacks in New Zealand, and a lot of these big teams, they don't really want you to know. This is years ago now, so the kind of the word's out. But a lot of these teams, they don't want you to know that they're doing these things because it's not quite mainstream yet. It's catching up. So like, there's a lot of people that are doing breath work. They're not necessarily talking about it because they want to keep that kind of competitive advantage.
Mhm.
But yeah, high altitude I think is wonderful. I always look at the Sherpas on those Everest documentaries, and they're the true heroes, aren't they? You know, they're the ones that are running up and down, bringing the bags up and down, and you know, some guy gets up there and he's like, "Well, hey, I've climbed this mountain," but you know, had all that help. And I think they've adapted somehow, haven't they, over generations to handle that, and they're almost like a bit superhuman compared to the rest of us.
Yeah, in Peru as well, the people who live in the Andes have higher lung capacity because you
Mm,
just an evolved advantage over years of generations of living at that high altitude. Yeah,
mm,
have you? I had a guy on my podcast a few years ago, Adam Skolnick, I think his name is. He wrote a book about free divers, and he's a free diver.
mm,
And
mm.
he's a really interesting guy. He's written a couple other books since then, and he writes for the New York Times and other. He's pretty big time journalist, but he's very into that sort of breath holding. Uh, like I also,
Yeah,
my buddy Kyle, who's a big wave surfer, he did a breath holding workshop. I think he got up to 4 minutes.
nice. Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
That
Oh, go on.
Go ahead. No, have you
No, so
done that?
yeah, yeah. I didn't quite get 4 minutes, but there's a guy called Tom Zitas, and he was the first human to hold his breath on record for 10 minutes. Now, maybe fishermen were doing this in Greece like 5,000 years ago,
Yeah.
probably, but he was the first one to do it about 7 or 8 years ago. And we've become quite close now. So I was just speaking to him earlier today, actually. He invited me to his retreat in Corfu last year, and he got my breath holds. I always struggle. One of the reasons I was drawn to breath work is I always had like really bad anxiety and like quite high stress. And
Mm.
so when I did the Wim Hof, it got rid of that. I was like, wow, that's incredible. And it obviously came back again, but then I've learned these gentle breathing techniques. But anyway, um, I always struggled with my breath holds. So I'd get to a certain point and it'd be like I'm about to have a panic attack, and I just wouldn't be able to work on it. It was really, really awful. And with him, within a couple of days, I got to 3 minutes and 14 seconds as a breath
Wow.
hold. And I know I could get to 4 minutes if we only did it for 3 days. And that was in the water. So it's incredibly dangerous. You only do it with like a professional, and they're like every 30 seconds or 20 seconds, you just give a little finger like up in the air to show you're still alive, not breathing, because you can black out in there. But it was what the most interesting thing was, like you come face to face with like your anxiety, because it's like you're
Mm.
holding your breath. You've got plenty of oxygen. You can probably survive much longer, but you have to wrestle with like yourself. And so it's all about like being calm. So he's constantly saying to me, "Relax your neck, relax your shoulders. You're doing great." And you can hear it because your head's under the water, but he's like right next to you. And he's like, "You've just made 1 minute, you've just made 1 minute 30 seconds, and you're doing great, Mike." And just that like helping me to like just relax. And then you go through these like shudders where your body's like just trying to save your life, it's trying to make your diaphragm go, and you're really fighting against it. And then you kind of come out of that and it's like relaxing. And I'm sure it happens a few more times, but he did it. He got to I think 11 minutes the first time, and he also did 22 minutes, but that's huffing pure oxygen, so it's still very impressive. But he did
Mm.
22-minute 22-second breath hold. I think 15 million people watched that across the planet. And so this guy, he's so chilled. Like I was just telling the story the other day, after we did some training in Corfu, you've got to be fasted, so you can't have any water, you cannot drink the night before, you can't have, sorry, you can have water, you can't have any food, you can't have any alcohol the night before, you can't have any coffee. And then you do your exercise, and then lunchtime comes and you can break your fast and you can relax. And so I had a couple of coffees and a big sandwich, and about an hour later Tom was still there with the same coffee, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" He goes, I like to taste my coffee." And he's just like sipping it. He's just so chilled and so relaxed. And I was like, I need to take a leaf out of this guy's book. But yeah, it's good. I couldn't get deep under the water because my ears, my tubes were not adjusting properly. So I think I got about 7 meters down because we did some free diving as well, and that was still really cool. I remember looking up, and you're on one breath, and you're like, "Wow, that's amazing." But some people got really deep to the floor, and that was yeah, that's a incredible experience. And again, felt quite natural to be holding your breath underwater. It's a really, really bizarre thing. Again, it's like something maybe we did many generations ago. It's in our
Mm.
DNA somewhere. We'd go and get the fish or the turtle or something.
That I feel like there's a theme in a lot of the things we're talking about, which is whether it's the cold or the holding breath or fasting or abseiling, like all these things. There's like an initial phase, or even what I was talking about with the sensory deprivation, the flow tank.
Mm,
There's an initial phase where you're grappling with the experience and it creates anxiety.
yeah.
And if you go through that phase, then there's a calming zone.
Mm,
There's a Zen zone, but you need to go through the turbulence to get to the Zen, right? So,
yeah.
holding your breath, the first 30 seconds, you're going, no, I'm going to die. And then, fasting, the first 12 hours, whatever, I'm hungry. And then your body's like, oh, I feel light. I feel fine. Your divorce, right?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
relationship challenges,
Yeah.
quitting your job, like
Yeah.
it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's really stressful and turbulent and crazy, but then if you just pass through it, then you're fine. Getting
Yeah.
into the cold water is hard. Being in the
Yes.
cold water is not hard.
Yeah.
First time I did
Yeah.
it with Wim is first time I ever did it at all, really. I mean, I jumped in streams and shit, when I was a kid and growing up, but when I met Wim and he set up the ice barrel, and he was like, "You want to do this?" I said, "Sure, let's do it." Um, and I just got in, and he said, "Okay, try to make it to, I don't know if it was 90 seconds or whatever it was." And he was standing there talking to me, and we were having this chat, and I was up to, my neck in the water, and he was like, "Okay, you're almost there." And I said, "I'm fine, Wim. This is fine." And he was I think he was partly impressed and partly disappointed that it was like, I was just like, I don't know, man, this isn't, it's fine. And, and then I passed 90 seconds and, got up to 2 minutes and he was still counting it off. And after like 3 minutes, he's like, "All right, get out of the water, motherfucker. I want to get in there." It's like, all right, I'll get
You
out.
showed him up.
But it was great. But yeah, I mean, it's the transition that's
Yeah.
hard. It's not, birth, right? Birth is
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
Being alive is not that hard.
Yeah.
Maybe dying is hard. Being dead isn't hard, right?
No, no. It's you know this better than most. When in human history have we ever been this fucking comfortable? Never. And it's not good for us, is it? We shouldn't be
Mm,
able to have a thermostat. I don't know. I sit in this chair all day. My body's just rotting in this chair. I need to be
yeah,
moving. And
yeah.
I think about that a lot. You said on the podcast many years ago, always take the hard road or something to that effect. And I think about
It
those
doesn't
words a
sound like
lot.
me. It sounds like Rogan. I think Rogan said that.
Maybe I've mixed it. I thought it was you, but I do think about that a lot, which is like we're way too comfortable, and we just destroy. I don't know. Like I don't get enough daylight in my eyes. Cold showers. So we find all these little hacks. I think because it gives us something from our past. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
we should be uncomfortable, and that's normal. We should be fasting, because we probably went days without food. In our ancestors. And in fact, I want to tell you about. Have you heard of breatharianism?
yeah. People think they can survive on
Fucking
breath
hell!
alone.
So first of all, disclaimer: do not do this. This is people die. But I've
Right,
just interviewed the guy that did a 10-year documentary about it, and it was fascinating. It's going to come out probably next week. The document, the podcast, and it's really interesting because there's two camps. There's people that claim never to have eaten anything. There's a guy called Prahlad Yani, and he died at 90, but he went 70 years apparently without a drop of water or an ounce of food. But then there's this other camp, and it relates back to what you're saying. There's a load of breatharians that are getting by on around 300 calories a day. And he references this book called "We're Eating Ourselves to Death." And that one seems more possible to me, that we can sustain ourselves for an incredibly long period of time on very little. And he even quotes a study around, and this is, by the way, this is really controversial shit, but he's like, there's some studies out there that photosynthesis in humans could be possible in terms of we can get something from the sunlight. And there's all, I know Wim's done sun gazing and he's talked about that sort of stuff. So it's a very interesting field. I'm not necessarily bought into it, but it's just this thing around maybe we are eating way too much. He talks about calorific theory and how there's some bits that might not actually work out. And anyway, it's a whole thing. There's a documentary people should check out. And like I say, he poured 10 years of his life into this, traveled all around the world, went to India and met these people that claim to do it, and people in China and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, I think it comes back to this thing around we should be uncomfortable, and maybe we are eating, maybe 2,500 calories a day isn't the recommended daily amount. Maybe that's just something we've come up with now, right? I don't know.
Yeah, and these are the same people who, the U.S. the Food and Drug Administration comes up with. No, it's not the food pyramid with, like eat lots of grains and pasta, as much pasta as possible. It's like, what? Yeah, I don't think their advice on nutrition is all that reliable. But I also think that nobody has lived for 70 years without a drop of water or any food.
I don't think so.
I think that person's a fucking charlatan, a dead charlatan at this point.
Well, he is dead now.
Yeah. He died anyway. Mike, what's the name of your podcast? Is it Take a Deep Breath?
So it's the Breathcast on Take a Deep Breath. It's on Spotify and iTunes, and then we've got the main YouTube channel, which is Take a Deep Breath, and about 250 exercises on there now, so you can go on there and fill your boots all for free. And if anyone's interested in working with me one-on-one, my website is takeadeepbreath.co.uk, and there's multiple ways we can work together, courses and different bits and bobs. But if you want to try some free breathing exercises, feel free to pop on over to YouTube.
Fantastic. Hey, I'm really glad things are working out for you, man.
Thank you, mate. Thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
You're coming from a good place, and I think that's so important. So many people are, and I don't blame anybody. Everybody, is trying to find a way to make a living and monetize whatever they're interested in, and but I think that a lot of people are primarily motivated by their own selfishness, and since I met you, I could feel you're motivated by something deeper than that. So I applaud that, and I really appreciate that energy in you.
Thank you, mate. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. I love your podcast, and it's been a real pleasure to be on there, so thank you.
Yeah, anytime. Come back.
Yes, dude.